Welcome to Talk to Brazil, the world's first English language internet radio program about business in Brazil, now in podcast form. I'm Tom Reaoch and your host for the show. I'm talking from my studio in Campinas, the state of São Paulo, Brazil. So when you talk to Tom, you talk to Brazil and the world. Today's guest is Daniel Bland. Daniel is the editor for the Global Fleet Latam and Fleet Latam websites and magazines. He's an American who grew up in Hawaii, and he talks to us today from his office in São Paulo, Brazil, where he's been living since 2004. Daniel Bland, as editor, also was an owner of a few businesses in Los Angeles, one of those being an online music distribution platform which featured streaming audio and video back in 1997. As I mentioned, here in Brazil since 2004, he's also a journalist covering business in Brazil and Latin America. His current focus is on automobile fleet and mobility in Latin America, and as the editor, he takes care of the information to the websites and magazines. He's a member of the Fleet Latam Advisory Board and a part-time teacher for executives in Brazil. Daniel and I initially connected on LinkedIn a number of years ago, and Daniel has been a guest on our show in the past. So with that, good morning, Daniel, and welcome back to Talk to Brazil.
Hi, good morning, Tom. Good to hear from you again, and it's going to be a good talk today.
And it's always good to talk to you because as a journalist, you've been through a number of organizations. You have a really good feeling of business in Brazil, and that's our focus. So tell our listeners a little bit about where you are today and what is the Global Fleet Latam? What are the websites and the magazines?
First of all, the company that I'm working with here is started off in Europe, which was called Fleet Europe. With their website, fleeteurope.com. And then they thought to expand it in a more global fashion, so they started globalfleet.com. And then for me, it's been a couple years now with them, and is the Latam version of it, because and it's called fleetlatam.com. And so I'm taking care of all of Latin America, Brazil, which is actually the largest market in what our topic is today in the automobile and mobility. Brazil is the largest, with Mexico being the second. But I'm taking care of all of Latin America.
Okay. So you're the man. You're the eyes and the ears of the organization in Latin America.
In Latin America, yeah, in Latin America.
Good. Well, as I think most of our listeners and me personally have seen, in terms of mobility and in terms of fleet management, things are changing rather quickly.
Oh yeah, in the automobile and mobility industry, you're probably going to see some of the biggest changes since you and I have been born in the next 10 years or so. A lot of changes are taking place. So it's an interesting time for me to be involved with this.
Yeah, I noticed the other day one of your articles that you posted, a post on LinkedIn regarding electric bicycles. And I think I answered back and I mentioned here where I live in Campinas, I live very close to Unicamp, which is a university. And just a month or so ago, the yellow bike concept started with the people freeing up the bicycle with their mobile phone and actually renting and using the bike by minute. And it's just taken off, and I said that it looks like a lot of worker ants around here, everybody riding their bicycle. So is that happening across the board? Do you see this coming to Brazil? I see it here in Campinas. What's the rest of Brazil look like?
Oh, certainly. So, yeah. So I guess the issue you want to talk about is what's coming to Brazil over the next few years. And one of the concepts that I want to cover, maybe talk about, is the concept of shared mobility. So
go right ahead.
Shared mobility, for sure it is, and it's actually started in other countries, like in the United States, and in China, where they so much so that the public are kind of complaining that there are a lot of bikes in China. There are so many bikes over there, and in this along with the bicycle, where the scooter concept in the United States, I guess people are starting to complain because of the legislation of where they're going to ride. But yeah. So like about last year, they started here in where I live in the Brooklyn in Sao Paulo, the
Hmm.
yellow bike, and that's the bike with the with no station. So I guess you call it the dockless type of mobility. And then of course you have the other company which is sponsored by Itaú,
Hmm.
and it's called the Tembesi bike system. Is if I'm right, it's still maybe the largest one in all of Latin America, and they're built. But this is station based, so they have stations,
Right.
and but yeah, it seems like this is growing, and especially in the neighborhood where I live, there's bikes and scooters all over the place.
Now, is that going to happen with cars? Do you see that? Are we going to have driverless cars and trucks here coming?
Yeah, maybe driverless is something a little bit, um, maybe more common in about 10 years in Brazil. But it's already starting in some countries, of course, and maybe
Right.
within the next few years it's going to happen. But at least for now, the concept of shared mobility where you have people sharing cars. Well, I guess first of all, we can um, we know about the Uber and the 99, which is the ride hailing companies,
Hmm.
which are growing quite a bit and pretty strong here in Brazil.
Right.
Um, Probably because the concept of not having a car is seems to be more common with the younger generation. So people just, I guess the younger people, I can just catch an Uber. But this is more maybe in the large cities in Brazil,
Hmm.
more maybe the more affluent cities, maybe not in the country areas. I'm not sure about the more rural areas.
Hmm.
Uh, but for me, this concept is a bit difficult to accept because I grew up in the States, and also it was quite a few years ago, and I just wanted to have a car. It's like
Well,
I
I'm
was
with
like
you.
16
That
years
I
old. I
knew
want a
that.
car, and
Right.
I can but I guess things are changing a bit, and I for the first time maybe this year I'm thinking maybe I don't need my car.
Right.
I can just like use these ride-hailing companies, or maybe like they have car sharing companies that are coming up. We can talk about this in a bit.
Right.
But it's difficult to get rid of my car.
Well, I think in a little bit nobody's going to want it, so you might want to do that quickly. I can see that the things are changing. So the sharing, I guess the word is sharing. That is the key word for anything anymore, right?
Yeah, we're more sharing as far as like you said about the bicycle. So we have some car sharing companies where you they're kind of like rent a car, but usually when you rent a car, you rent them
Hmm.
for a day or
Right.
more. So the car sharing would be like per minute.
Right.
This concept probably be more popular as time goes by, but it's a little bit complicated logistically speaking because when
Hmm.
you imagine you have a company with 100 cars and they're sharing just like these yellow bikes, they could end up in a place. Let's say we have the Lollapalooza concert over here in São
Right.
Paulo.
Right.
Imagine they take this car and they rent it for 10 minutes or whatever, 20 minutes to get to the Lollapalooza show. They
And
get
leave it
drunk,
there.
and then they leave it there because they want to catch Uber home because they shouldn't be driving. Then you're gonna have like 100 cars at
In
the
the
show
wrong
entrance, and
place.
how do they get back? So with the yellow bikes, they have staff to bring the bikes back, but cars are more complicated.
Very complicated.
And I think what will change this in the future is probably autonomous cars, but
Hmm.
um, this will take a while for at least, especially here in Brazil, for us to have autonomous cars. But because then they could just come home, they just come home where they need to go.
But now, when you're
But
looking out into what you're doing and looking at fleets, what are fleets to you? What makes up a fleet? Where is your focus?
oh, what we deal with, I work more with B2P business. So we
Hmm.
have what the companies that supply cars, which could be GM or maybe Volvo,
Hmm.
which is they supply cars, and or the other companies which actually rent or lease cars. So we have I'm working with some international companies like ILD Automotive and Arval from Europe, and then also local companies like Localiza.
Right.
So and then the buyers of the cars are the companies like the pharmaceutical companies, let's say like Johnson and Johnson, who
Hmm.
need like 200 cars for their company, This can be either by the executives who have cars for a benefit, or
Right.
maybe operational cars for the
Hmm.
salespeople or the technicians. So they all need cars, and so what I do is or what our magazine and our websites do is help to tie in the buyers with the providers.
Okay.
Uh,
When I say,
and
and I agree with you, what you mentioned, that portion of business is going to, I'm going to say, remain strong because Brazil is such a big country. Latin America is big. And when you talk about the infrastructure, everything's far away. And it's nice to have a yellow bike. It may be nice to have a driverless car. But in the end of the day, for an executive, for myself, for yourself, you were talking about that offline, you need a car to get where you're wanting to go. And that's life for a professional.
yeah, yeah. And what this, like I said, there's two suppliers. You can buy them from like the auto manufacturer or do the leasing. One thing I see in the future is probably the concept of leasing for companies will be increasing in the next few years.
Hmm.
Um, it's pretty common in Europe.
Right.
More than half of the companies have cars leased out for the employees. In Brazil, it's like maybe 1 in 10 companies,
Mm.
but this probably will change in the years to come. It just we need so what I'm here is to help mature the market. People learn what the benefit
Okay.
of leasing is, because you can they have companies, some of these companies that actually operate the fleet for you, and then let's
Hmm.
say if you are like I
Okay.
mentioned Johnson and Johnson, you could concentrate more on your core business while you let the other company kind of like help you manage your fleet.
Now,
So
are Mexico and Argentina similar to Brazil in your view in fleet management?
yeah, pretty much about the same. Yeah, yeah. I think that companies are a little bit more concerned in other regions, like in Europe. People, the companies are more concerned with. They're very much into green solutions,
Hmm.
whereas Latin America, we are kind of worried about this, and Brazil, but it's more about saving money and
Cost, right, right.
personal safety.
Okay.
Yeah. And as far as the green concept, one thing that we will see in a few years to come are electric cars. So this is the big talk of all the auto shows is the electric cars. But they're still a bit expensive now. But in
Well,
time,
here in Brazil, we have talking about the electric buses are being built here by a Chinese company. And
yeah. So I don't
and
know which
there
company.
are examples of electric cars. So uh, generally speaking, my feeling is that it's all starting up. Is that what you see? Brazil is starting up towards electric.
Yeah, yeah, it's starting up, maybe a couple years behind some of the countries, but there are other countries that are behind Brazil as well. But as far as the commercial buses, yeah, a lot of the this electric concept is more for vehicles that are operating, I would say, more or less 200 kilometers per day
Right.
or more, or 5,000 kilometers per month. And those buses, yeah, the Chinese company BYD, and there are other companies as well, but
Hmm.
they work a lot with the electric buses. Actually, China has a large amount of electric vehicles. Europe is doing more in Northern Europe, like in Norway, they
Hmm.
have a lot of electric vehicles. The United States, we have more or less, but it's more from California, which is
But I
switching to
think too, when you talk about the United States, and I think we talk about Brazil in that context, because the distances are so great. Uh, 200 kilometers, 500 kilometers, and basically the restriction is a battery and the weight. And so until you find a battery and you can reduce the weight, uh,
yeah,
people
yeah.
here
So that
in Brazil, you can drive 1,000, 1,500 kilometers almost in a day.
Yeah, most of the fleet managers that I'm talking with companies, the issue is the lack of infrastructure between cities. Let's say if
Right,
I'm going to go to your office in Campinas from São Paulo,
right.
they're a little bit worried that maybe if it's necessary, and it's actually Campinas is not that far, but there are cities that are even farther. We need to have the proper infrastructure, recharge the batteries, and then also we need to have batteries that provide a longer range for cars. But
Right.
the ranges are increasing, every year, and the technologies is changing. and I guess some of the maybe the cars that will be launched this year might be interesting for the listeners to keep an eye out for is well, we already have the BMW i3 and the Toyota Prius hybrid,
Right,
which
right.
is the best-selling hybrid in the world. But
Mhm.
this year we will be getting a Nissan Leaf, Renault Zoe, the Chevrolet Bolt. So those are some interesting cars that are coming. Um, they might be a little bit expensive for
Now,
some of the
but within
consumers
your
for now,
fleet
but they should go
management,
down in
do you
time.
find the corporate clients, are they looking towards these hybrid? Are they looking towards that?
They are looking towards it, but they have to measure the TCO, which is the total cost of ownership.
Okay.
And because of the purchase price is higher, and you just have to calculate, but this is, you have to calculate a lot of numbers to see if it's worth it. I think it's more for like operational, maybe like people who use the car a lot
Hmm.
and they don't go intercity, they don't travel to other cities. If you have to go travel to a farm or something like that, maybe this might not be the option for now.
But I like
Uh,
that concept. I want you to repeat that. The TCO then is the total cost operation, right? The operational
yeah,
cost
total cost of ownership. So
of
in anything you
ownership.
buy,
I'm sorry,
yeah,
ownership.
yeah, you can buy something that seems cheap in the beginning, but you need to calculate everything over the mid to long period to see if it's
Right.
worth it in the long run, of course. Yeah. So that's one thing you have to calculate with electric cars or any fleet
Any
vehicle.
car, actually, even when you get back to
Yeah.
the leasing, it all fits into a package. And my personal view in Brazil, I think from the corporate, obviously from the corporate view, that is the key point. And my experience and where I used to work, that was it. What's the total operating cost? And that was important. And
Yeah, because
still, Brazil
they
is
can
driven
see.
by cost, so that fits in what you mentioned earlier. That maybe Europe is looking green, and here in Brazil specifically, looking more to cost and safety. I think the two keys for that.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, you have to calculate all of that, and yeah, it will take a little bit of time until the cost of the price of the cars get down. I mean, where they get lowered. I think it's less than 1% of the cars of the fleet is electric.
Hmm.
It's more in Europe, but still in Europe, it's not that
It's
much more.
small,
We're talking like 2 or 3%. Maybe Norway is like, I think it's around double that or more.
but in your business, that's what grabs the headline, right?
Yeah, people like to talk about this a lot, and it's interesting. Other things is that, like you said, autonomous vehicles, but this is probably going to take place. I mean, maybe in a few years we'll start having it in.
Right.
It's happening now. We'll start having it in some countries, maybe in Brazil. I mean, maybe I don't know, 10 years from now. Of course, the people are dabbling with it now, but I mean, you got autonomous vehicles. We have flying cars coming, but Brazil has a lot
Everything.
of other things to take care of too, to other concerns before.
But
Uh,
in any way, you're talking so much about change, and things change. And in Brazil, they change up, they change down, they change all around. They can change slowly, they can change quickly. So I think the important thing is to be in touch with you, to follow your sites and magazines, because I'm sure you're going to be posting and showing, and people will be able to read what are the changes, and they happen all the time. Uh,
yeah, yeah. So yeah, with me and what we're doing, we're gonna be always posting news, what's being changed and updated, with all the new stuff that's going on. This
mhm.
concept of smart cities and smart cars. Cars are becoming like computers now. And one thing about Brazil, it's pretty resilient in terms of change and being
Right,
open-minded. So
right.
there are some tech companies and new innovations coming from Brazil. They everybody's making an app for everything nowadays.
Well, no, you're right, and everything it is. I mentioned that in a interview I had last week. I'm going to say not too long ago. Everybody was concerned about having a nice website. I personally consider my websites outdated, and I'm working towards, if you don't have an app, podcasts are listened to on smartphones. And many of the people who will be listening to us later will be downloading this podcast, and they'll listen when they want to on their smartphone. They may be on their bicycle, in their car, in the subway, on a bus, in a plane, wherever. And that's how what we are saying is going to be consumed. And so the direction is that. And I think in all senses and for all businesses, that's what we need to be looking for.
Yeah. There are a lot of new things as years go by. Technology is moving so fast. But for you and for me and all the listeners, this is great. But let's keep in touch with. Sometimes people start to lose touch with reality, and everything is virtual. But we need to keep it real at the same time.
Right. Well, how can our listeners, how can our audience be in touch with you, Daniel? What's the best way? How can they find you?
Well, I am all over the internet and social networks, but I guess the most centralized way to get a hold of me is at my website, which is Daniel Bland. It's my name, danielbland.com, and you can see, visit the website, danielbland.com.
Okay. Well, I just want to spell that out for everybody. It's Daniel, DanielBland.com. So danielbland.com.
Perfect, thanks.
You will find Daniel, and you will find other ways, everything that he's working on, the sites he's working with, and you'll be able to be in touch to these daily changes. Right, Daniel?
Yeah, sounds good. And I also just want to say thanks for the opportunity to talk with you, Tom. Good to talk to you again, and hopefully I provide some information that's useful.
No, we're going to be back because exactly what you're saying and what we're talking about, and you were saying that's going to change. So we're going to have you back more frequently because as things change, we want to keep talking about it. So we'll be seeing you in the future. Okay?
Sounds great.
So thanks again, and thanks for sharing your Monday morning with us. Okay?
Okay.
And I would also like to invite our listeners to take a look at our website, which is talktobrazil.com, and follow the links to the Talk to Brazil business directory, where you'll find a list of competent professional service providers. You can always send your suggestions or comments and find me at tom@talktobrazil.com, or on LinkedIn, you can join the Talk to Brazil group and follow our discussions. So remember, when you talk to Tom, you talk to Brazil and the world. Goodbye, and thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to Tom Reaoch on Talk to Brazil, the business connector to Brazil.